Hi, this is Jim Coe doing a close reading for the House Divided Project from Dickinson College, as well as the Gilder Lehrman Institute. Today I'm going to be taking a closer look at Abraham Lincoln's letter to Charles Ray on June the 27th, 1858. Before we start, the letter is of some note, because Lincoln's writing here to a fellow Republican in Charles Ray, the editor of the Chicago Daily Tribune, and actually is a letter filled with a few points of couched anger. Surprise, shock, and astonishment. And for a man who could have rewritten the letter, could have refrained from sending it in Lincoln, it's interesting that we have some instances here where his anger comes through. And it's worth looking for posterity's sake. So the letter begins, "My dear sir, how in God's name do you let such paragraphs into the Tribune as the enclosed cut from that paper of yesterday? Does Sheehan write them?" Sheehan here refers to Charles Ray's rival, the Democratic newspaper editor in Chicago. Lincoln continues, "How can you have failed to perceive that in this short paragraph you have completely answered all your own well-put complaints of Greeley and Sister Burlingame?" Here referring to Horace Greeley and Anson Burlingame, who are some northeastern Republicans in this country. "What right have you to interfere in Indiana more than they in Illinois? And what possible argument can be made why all Republicans shall stand out of Honorable John G. Davis's way in this district in Indiana that cannot be made why all Republicans in Illinois shall stand out of Honorable S.A. Douglas's way?" Here referring to Stephen A. Douglas. "The part in larger type is plainly editorial, and your editorial at that, as you do not credit it to any other paper. I confess it astonishes me. Yours truly, A. Lincoln." Now, there are a few things to really unpack in here, but let's first understand the context. In 1858, Lincoln is running for the Senate seat from Illinois, a Senate seat that he's actually facing off against Stephen A. Douglas for. Douglas, obviously, the Democrat, and Lincoln, the Republican. But what he writes here is about an article in Charles Ray's paper, the Chicago Daily Tribune, which is a reprint of the Indianapolis Daily Journal from a few days prior. Now, the Journal in Indianapolis printed a story about John G. Davis, who we see mentioned here, who is an anti-Lecompton Democrat. So he's somebody who is not on the side of James Buchanan, who is the champion of the Lecompton Compromise. And Davis's people reach out to the paper in Indianapolis and print up an article which says that any Republicans who are anti-Lecompton as well should stand behind Davis, because his name was not put forward for the Democratic nomination, which they feel is an affront. So their supporters, Davis's supporters, feel that if the Republicans, who are anti-Lecompton, side with the anti-Lecompton Democrat and vote for him in the election, that the Democrat, in this case Indianapolis's John Davis, will lead the way and win the ticket and win the nomination and the election. Now that's all well and good, except this article is reprinted in a paper, Charles Ray's paper, the Chicago Daily Tribune, a few days later. And the timing of this could not be worse. Abraham Lincoln officially accepts the Republican nomination on June 16th, and that's when he delivers his famous House Divided speech. The letter itself that he sends to Ray is sent only 11 days later, because on the 26th is when the Chicago Daily Tribune reprints the Indianapolis Daily Journal's letter. And that's why Lincoln gets mad. And he says, "What right have you to interfere in Indiana more than they in Illinois?" Now, the "they" is tricky. Part of what he's referring to is the fact that this is being reprinted in Illinois. The other issue is the "they" comes right after he mentions Horace Greeley and Anson Burlingame. Burlingame, especially, is interesting. Lincoln takes a shot at him here, calls him Sister Burlingame, challenges his manhood, which, as an insult in the 1850s, was pretty shocking. Now, the reason he does this is because Greeley and Burlingame, just like the Davis supporters, say Republicans should get behind any anti-Lecompton candidate they can. Which upsets Lincoln because the anti-Lecompton Democrat in his state is Stephen Douglas, who is also already the incumbent. Now, it's worth noting that Burlingame wins his congressional race in 1858 with the help of anti-Lecompton Democrats. So, 10 days after the House divided speech, Lincoln sees the article reprinted. He hears that Greeley and Burlingame are encouraging Republicans to support Douglas in the election. Lincoln is furious, and he attacks Burlingame, calling him Sister Burlingame. The thing that makes this even tougher is that this may have been Lincoln's best shot at winning a Senate seat in Illinois. The reason is because Douglas broke with James Buchanan over the Lecompton bill. And not only broke with him, but broke with him in such a public and vocal and declarative manner that Buchanan was furious and actually supported a second Democrat to run against Lincoln and Douglas for the seat in the Senate in Illinois. So Lincoln saw that the Democrats may split the bill between Buchanan-backed Lecompton Democrats and Douglas-backed anti-Lecompton Democrats. And if they split the bill, Lincoln had a clear shot at this Senate seat. The Lincoln-Douglas debates haven't started. Those come in the fall. So Lincoln is at a time right now where he should be taking advantage of this. And instead, he sees that Charles Ray has reprinted a letter stating that Republicans should support an anti-Lecompton man. And he doesn't care that it was published in Indiana and reprinted in Illinois. The fact that the sentiment now has ink behind it in his home state infuriates him. The fact that his fellow Republicans, Burlingame and Greeley, are working behind the scenes to encourage the same thing after Lincoln has worked so hard for the Republican Party, it infuriates him. And so to Ray, who Lincoln considers a contemporary, considers a fellow Republican, considers somewhat of a confidant, I'm sure, says to him at the end of the letter, the part in larger type is plainly editorial, saying these are your words. You haven't attributed them to anybody else. And the fact that you would put it in there, he finishes, I confess, it astonishes me.